Hello and welcome. I will be explaining what the Sequin material has to offer in terms of features and different parameters that you can use. A general starting setup would look like setting this size to 2K or 1K depending on your system and how heavy the material might feel while using it. 2K works for me. Going down to normal mixing, setting this to replace. I will explain later on in the video on why I set this to replace. For the height of the material, set this to 0 for now, as we will only be working with the normal maps. Okay, general rule of thumb, when using the replace normal mixing right here, you will notice that the normal maps are missing from your mesh. So what you can do is bring that baked normal map and just set it in the fill layer in the normal section and just have it at the bottom of your layer. I will go over the sequins category for now. The global sequin rotation affects the rotation of all the sequins, the whole system, and where each sequin is facing. You can adjust the rotation of the sequins however you like. I will set this to 0 for now. Preferably when using this material, you don't tile or rotate using the UV transformations at the top here as you would with different materials, as this may break some of the functionality later on. Please stick to these two for now, unless you're doing something very fast and you just want to get a good result without having to mess around with the different settings. For tiling sequins, this is self-explanatory. The more you set this, the more sequins you'll have in your scene. And this is not a locked value. You can set this to 200 and it should work. So I'll set this to 120 or so. For the offset horizontal, this effect affects only every other horizontal line. So it shifts it to the right and left. So if I set this to 0, you'll notice that all the sequins are now making vertical stripes. And if you set this to 0.5, for example, you'll get a sort of fish scale-esque look, almost like diagonal or like a random stripe look. And you can get a bunch of different looks by setting this into fractal numbers like this. I'll leave it at 1 for now. The use spawn sequin map. If you set this to true, an input will open up at the bottom here, and you can input any alpha map or an anchor, as I have here in these layers. I will show you briefly. If I set this as this mask as the thing that drives that input, you will notice that the spawn map essentially is using whatever is white in that mask and will spawn a sequin. Whatever is black will show the underlying material, which is this base at the bottom right here, as you can see. So you can create a bunch of different designs using these inputs. So that's for the first one. The second one, this feature allows you to use the underlying side of the sequence. So if you flip the sequin, you would have a different face that you can have different attributes to that face as well, like color and whatnot. So you can set this to one of these. I have again a mask that I can use. And I just have it anchored and hidden. There is nothing in the layer other than the mask, just for visualization. As you can see here, the mask that I plugged in, whatever is in white will be flipped to the other side. So this is facing down. All these sequins are facing up and they have a different color. And whenever you enable this option, an extra category opens up called pattern editing, and I will be explaining this later on in the video. For now, I'm going to set this to false. Going down to general settings, these settings create irregularities in your sequence system. So instead of having uniform looking sequence, so if I set everything here to 0, everything will look very, very uniform, and it will look like fish scales, and it looks unrealistic. So I'll set this back to the default values just to break up the looks. So going from the top, this random rotation intensity will rotate your sequence randomly, but be careful, increasing this too much will cause your sequence to intersect with each other. So keep that in mind. The use random rotation mask, if set to true, will allow you to use a mask where it drives wherever those rotation intensity that you increased, you can drive that using that mask. So if I set this to the alpha map and increase this so I can see what's happening, you'll notice that the effect is only happening where the S is. Oops, not this one. So where this mask is, wherever there is white, the effect will be only happening there. So going to the next one, the random normal intensity. This will affect the normal direction each sequin is facing. So at the current moment, each sequin is facing outwards from its position. So if I set this high to a high value, you'll notice that this will look like a peppered look. It's random directions, each one has its own color. And if you look here, you'll notice that the light is just hitting random ones and lighting random ones that are facing that direction. And because each sequin has a random normal value assigned to it, so you get this kind of chaotic look, which might be beneficial if you're doing something like a pillow or a cushion. And the use random normal mask, you can use this again to drive where that effect is happening using an alpha map. And I'll plug the same S again, and you can see that happening only where the S is visible in white. For the random height, this assigns a random height value to each sequin, and this at high values might break the realism of this material. But if you have dense enough sequins, this might give a nice layered effect of your sequins, even though they might be intersecting, but at a distance that might not be visible. So, and the random position gives each sequin a random position. It moves it slightly around a small radius, and you might get this kind of look. Again, you can use this with different masks and different techniques, with a spawn sequin mask for a map, for example, to create a different kind of look. You can mess around with these settings. I'll keep him as the default for now. Moving on to the normal. The general normal intensity. This is fairly useful if you want to increase the intensity of the normal map. I mean, this you can technically adjust using the opacity here, or doing something with the levels, for example. You can boost this absolutely outside of the slider, but I have it in here just for ease of use. Later on, when you're layering different materials, if you're using a spawn map, for example, and you want to show the underlying lace material or a jeans material, you can use this to adjust the normal map intensity instead of lowering it from here and having that start to show the underlying material. So you'd have like layers. So this next section is the use mesh normal texture. So what this does essentially, it samples the baked normal map that you baked from your high poly, onto the sequin direction. So you see how this part is facing downwards. If I enable this, it would make those sequins that are placed there face the same direction that they're meant to be. So this is useful because sequins are not meant to bend around these areas. They're meant to have a sharp, creased look. So enabling this would give you that look. And this would use, if you've baked your normal maps and you have it already in here, it should automatically seed itself into the inputs here. But if it's not already here, you can plug it in yourself. And because I have the normal map enabled at the bottom here, so if I enable that effect and still have this on, you would have double the normal maps. So preferably, I mean, I tend to do this. I turn this off and only have the sequins drive that effect for me. And you can see here, as I said, they're being sampled, and that section of the sequence is facing the direction they should be. And if you look here in the mesh normal intensity, so this slider only affects the normal map of the parts that are affected by the normal by the baked normal texture. So if I increase this to 1, you can put this to a different to a higher level, but I think 1 is more than enough for now. Yeah, something like this, 0.8. You can see this effect much more, and you can see it here even. You can see how it's sampling that area and driving those creases. See it here where those creases are happening. And if I show you the underlying normal map, you can see this gradation of the creases. And if I turn this off, you'll see it happening again, like creases alternating. So yeah, this is how you use this feature. And because you're using this baked normal, you can absolutely, instead of using this one, uh, plug this same one that you baked into a fill layer and have a paint layer underneath and paint away the parts that you're not interested in. So if I do this, for example, obviously, if you're plugging anything that is not a mask, make sure that you're referencing the correct channel, or else you're going to get something weird like this. So go down to normal, and it should sort itself. Yeah. So if I want to paint away some of these areas, almost like masking out the areas that I'm not too interested in. So I just want to have this area in the chest be affected. So I go down here, set a paint layer underneath that referenced anchor, put the material only to normal, and just paint away wherever I don't like. Sorry, no need to color pick anything. Just use the flat uh, blue that is by default. So you'll notice now, and make sure that paint layer to be in normal. So it would actually paint away rather than try to blend. So you'll see now I'm painting away that effect off of that part. And you can absolutely have this like at a low opacity, or I'm using a mouse right now, but you can absolutely use a brush and have like a different effect there. But yeah, and you can maybe test some of these different blend layers, blend modes to get a different result. But yeah, this is one way you can do this. All right, moving on. So now I'm going to explain what the custom pattern alpha that we've shown before, what the settings of pattern editing that are available now, what each of these uh, can do. So for explanation purpose, I'll set this to a higher number, maybe 215. So you can see this a bit more. So the transition noise intensity. This is essentially noise that is applied on top of that pattern. So it's almost like you're warping that pattern using a random noise. So you'll see like that original shape, that square that you're supposed to have in the middle, or like rectangle in the middle, is now being warped into this shape. And this is the intensity of that warping. And the transition noise tiling, this is the tiling of the noise mask that is driving that warp. So the more that I increase this, the more this will look like it's being eaten away, like corroding almost. And the less tiling, the more it will be like wobbly, like less effect, really, like a big shape kind of warp. And you can have a balancing act between these two and get the look you're after. You can have like a little bit of corroding in general. But yeah, these two do that. And the third one is just a different, almost like a different seed of that tiling noise without having to change the seed on the whole thing. So you've probably seen this order in multiple different materials in Substance. But yeah, this is what it does. So the interesting, the pattern transition distance. This is the interesting slider. So moving on to pattern transition distance. This slider controls the transition of your pattern. So if you set this to a positive value, it will bevel itself outside. So it's almost like what it does something like this. So if I was to put a bevel, and I would bevel outside, you see, it would change the transition to outwardly. If you set this to a negative value, the transition would happen inwards. So at the moment, those circles are being transitioned outside. And the more that I increase this, the further the transition, the longer the transition would look like. So the closer this is to 0, let's just put a very small number, something like this. You'll notice that the change from yellow to purple or pink is very abrupt. There is no transition from flat to slightly up, slightly up, slightly up, and then hitting that wall, right? And you can do this the other way around. Let me just show you. I'll show you on this rectangle right here because it's a big shape. So you can see here that the transition is not happening abruptly. It's happening over the length of this distance. So the lower this is, the longer this transition would look. So you can see it's vertical, then slightly angled, and then slightly angled even more, 45 angle, and then 90, and then flat, right? Again, you can set this to, I think, is minus 0.2, something like that. Minus 0.15 can give you a good result. Honestly, this depends on how much tiling you have. So there is a balancing act you would have to do. And you might need to adjust your alpha that you're plugging in depending on how you're planning on doing the transition, if it's outwards or inwards. But yeah, this is what these two do. So moving on to Rustle. So Rustle is a similar feature to the pattern editing, except it does it to So let me just set this back to, because at 2K this looks a bit more like noise than sequence. So the Rustle feature, essentially what it does is it creates that flicking effect of the sequence. So let me just turn off the custom pattern for now so you can see only the effect and not be um, bothered by that. So if I set the Rustle effect strength to 1, just so for visualization purposes, and set the transition closer to 0, you'll start noticing that it's like it's flicking up, right? This noise, right? And this is the tiling again. If I set the tiling to 3, you see this noise. It's flicking those sequins up slightly, and the transition controls how long that flicking should look. The closer it is to 0, the more abrupt it is. So if I can go close to 0, you'll notice there is no like flicking to 45 and then completely vertical. It's just abrupt, and the further I go, again, the further I go from 0, the more subtle the effect looks, right? And this is a cool feature if you're trying to give like a subtle look to a flat sequin material, because if you look here, if I set the lighting to this angle, some of these are picking up the light because they're facing up out, and you can see in the normal map some darker bits right here. They're picking up some of that light, and if I set this to 0, you'll see what I mean. So I set that Rustle effect all the way to 0, and you'll notice the light is much more gradient-like. There isn't that small bits of sequins picking up light in that dark area where the shadow should be. And yeah, that's how you'd work around with this. And if you have the custom pattern alpha enabled, you're going to have a separate slider of the opacity, let's say, or strength. And you can have this be at 1, and you'll notice that effect of the rustle start to appear on the pattern itself. So for whatever reason you might not want that rustle effect to be happening on the pattern, you can completely remove it and have it exclusively happening on the yellow parts or the base, essentially. So similar to the previous, in the general settings where you have masks driving these kind of features, you can have a custom Rustle map using an alpha map. So I have this mask. I created it using just a world space normals with a up and down, top to bottom. So it's just picking up whatever is at the bottom or like facing the ground, let's say, and making that white. So I'm gonna plug that into the paint Rustle map, and you'll immediately notice that wherever there is a white section in that mask, those and even the gradient of that mask will be affected. It's not just the like black and white only. So you'll see here it's being affected. If I go here into the normal map, you'll see the colors change a bit. And it's happening here, around here. And you can of course like do this by hand, like paint away the parts that make no sense. But yeah, you usually see this effect happening where there are creases, so you can absolutely use like a curvature map to create like the places where this would be happening. And you can see at the bottom here, bottom of these. Moving on, I'll set this to true just for now. So in the base color, you can have color pick whatever color for the original, the main system. And again, for the pattern bit, you can change the color as well. So I'll explain these before I go into the custom color map. And for the HSL randomness here, so hue, saturation, luminance, these three self-explanatory, it just gives random values to the sequence. So if I set this to 0.16, you'll start to see like random hues be present on these. And the more I increase this, the wackier this looks. It looks like a clown. So if for whatever reason you need to have different saturations, different luminance, again, you have the option to do that. And yeah, for overlay curvature base color, this essentially puts the curvature baked from those sequins and overlays that on top. And the multiply AO is the same thing. You increase it and you'll have your AO multiplied on top of your sequence. I'll go into the use custom color map. So for this one, you can have a custom color map drive your colors essentially. So instead of having a standard one color kind of thing, you can have an image run, an image being sampled underneath to drive your sequence. So for now, for this, just very quickly, I just used one of the HDRIs here and here, and just anchored them here. You can use that and to plug into the inputs here. So I'll plug this one here and this one into this one. And you can see the pattern is separate. If you want that to be the same, you can absolutely just plug the same input into it. If you don't want to have a separate color for that one, but you do have the option. And obviously, if you have this turned off, that option gets taken away, and the original one that you plugged in will be used anyways. And that's it for the base color. For roughness, you can have a roughness value. Again, this is just a basic slider, setting this to from 0 to 1, just a general roughness value. And you can have, again, a randomness, same thing. You adjust this, you can have darker values, you can adjust this way, you can have lighter values. And you can use a custom roughness map. So you can plug in whatever. I just plugged in the S, so you can see whatever is in white is in pure roughness white. So it's very rough, and whatever's in black is pure shininess, right? So the metallic is just simple 1-0 slider. So that is all for the explanation of these settings. I will explain real quick how and why you would need to do the replace here. Again, you will need to do this if you're doing the normal map texture here. If you're using this and you only want this to drive your normal maps, you don't want to have this be enabled all the time. You will have to turn this on to replace. So say you have a spawn sequin map and you're only spawning sequins here, but you want to have a fabric underneath this. So you'll notice that the normal maps are getting mixed. So you go down to the normal map tab on the fabric sequence, you set this normal map to normal, and now they're on top of that texture. But make sure that whenever you're doing this, you don't have height, obviously, because we're not using height, but you're using the normal detail from that material. So if you're doing this, this will not work. You see, if I go to a normal plus height mesh, yeah, you'll see this will not work because it's deriving height detail and creating normal maps out of it. So this is how you'd have sequins sit on top of that fabric and not have them mix.